I've been driving trucks for over 15 years now, and I've seen just about everything the highways can throw at a person. Accidents, wildlife, strange people, whether that turns roads into rivers. But one night a few years ago on a run through New Mexico still comes back to me sometimes, especially when I'm driving alone late at night. It wasn't anything supernatural, but it was real, and it shook me up in a way I didn't expect. It started on a long, empty stretch of Highway 380 heading west. It was early summer, maybe around June. The day had been brutally hot, and even after sunset, the air felt thick and dry, like it was holding on to all the heat from the sun. I'd been driving since mid-afternoon, trying to make good time before resting at a truck stop outside Socorro. Once the sun went down, everything got dark fast. That part of New Mexico is just miles and miles of nothing. No lights, no houses, just open desert and a few mountains in the distance. The only light came from my headlights and the soft red glow of the gauges on the dashboard. The radio had lost signal a while ago, and I didn't have anything downloaded, so it was just the sound of the engine and the hum of the tires on the road. I wasn't tired yet, but the emptiness of the road was getting to me. Can be strange how the silence out there starts to feel heavy after a while. You get too used to the rhythm of your own truck, too aware of how alone you are. Sometime around 1 a.m., I saw something up ahead that caught my attention, a faint flicker of red lights. At first, I thought it was another truck, maybe stopped on the shoulder, but as I got closer, I realized it was a small car. An old sedan, silver or gray, pulled halfway off the road with its hazard lights blinking. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about that. Cars break down all the time, but the way it was sitting didn't look right. It was angled sharply toward the ditch, like it had swerved suddenly before stopping. And it was sitting too close to the lane, like whoever parked it hadn't taken the time to pull completely over. I slowed down and eased onto the shoulder a few yards behind it. I always keep a flashlight in the cab for situations like this. I shut off my engine, grabbed the light, and stepped down onto the gravel. The night air hit me hard, hot but dry, carrying that faint smell of dust and asphalt. The sound of insects filled the air, loud and steady, almost mechanical. The car's hazard lights were still flashing, slow and steady. The trunk was closed, both rear doors shut, but the driver's door was hanging wide open. I didn't see anyone inside. The interior light was on, glowing dimly. I walked up slowly, shining my flashlight around the area. No other vehicles, no houses, no light from any direction. The nearest sign of civilization was probably 20 miles away. I peered inside the car. The driver's seat was empty. The key was still in the ignition, and the engine wasn't running. There was a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder, and a phone charger dangling from the console. The glove box was open, papers scattered on the passenger seat. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. Most people don't just stop in the middle of nowhere, leave the door open, and walk away. I took a step back and shined the flashlight on the ground. I could see footprints in the dirt along the shoulder, just one set, heading away from the car and into the open desert. The prints were spaced unevenly, like whoever made them had been walking fast, maybe stumbling. It was strange. There was no reason to walk off that way. The desert stretched flat and empty as far as I could see. No light, no trail, nothing. Just endless sand and scrub. I followed the tracks for maybe 20 or 30 feet before I stopped. My flashlight beam was barely reaching far enough to see the ground clearly anymore, and I knew better than to go wandering into open desert in the middle of the night. People disappear out there all the time. I went back to my truck, climbed inside, and sat there for a minute, thinking. I figured the person must have broken down and gone to look for help, even though there was nowhere to go. Maybe they'd gotten turned around or picked up by someone else. I thought about staying and waiting, but it didn't feel right to sit there in the dark, so I started the truck again and drove off. About half a mile down the road, something in my mirrors caught my eye, a faint movement behind me. I slowed down a little, thinking maybe another car was coming. But when I looked closer, I didn't see headlights. Just a single small light, faint and unsteady, bouncing around near where the broken-down car had been. It looked like a flashlight. For a moment, I thought the driver had come back, maybe found their way out of the desert, but the light wasn't moving toward the road. It was moving along it, slowly, staying close to the shoulder. It flickered in and out as if it was being covered or blocked. I couldn't be sure what I was seeing in my mirrors. It could have been a reflection, or my eyes playing tricks after staring into the dark for so long. But I slowed down anyway and watched for another minute. The light stayed where it was, faint, hovering near the car, then vanished completely. That uneasy feeling crawled back up my spine. I pressed down on the gas and didn't look back again until I reached the next rest stop, maybe 40 miles away. I parked there for the night, but I couldn't shake the image of that car. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right. I ended up calling it in before I went to sleep, just in case. The highway patrol told me they'd send someone to check it out. The next morning, I woke up early and headed inside the diner attached to the stop. While I was eating, I overheard a couple of locals talking near the counter. They mentioned something about a wreck overnight, a car that had been found burned out along the highway west of Carrizozo. They said it must have caught fire sometime before dawn, probably from an electrical short. The driver was found about 100 yards away from the road, dead from exposure. I froze when I heard that. I didn't ask questions, but I knew exactly where they were talking about. Same stretch of highway, same description. That must have been the car I saw. I didn't know what to feel about it. The thought that I might have seen that person's last movements, those footprints, that light, stuck with me for days. If I'd stayed longer, maybe I could have helped. Or maybe I'd have been there when the fire started. It's hard to say which would have been worse. That night taught me something about the road. It's not always the dangerous drivers or the weather that get you. Sometimes it's just isolation. People underestimate how far apart things are out there. One wrong choice, one mechanical problem, and you're stranded in silence with no one around for miles. Ever since that night, I've kept extra water and a proper first aid kit in my cab. I stop when I see someone on the shoulder, no matter what time it is. I can't shake the thought of that one person walking off into the dark, leaving everything behind. The desert looks peaceful from a distance, but it hides how quickly things can go bad. Out there, you can disappear without a sound, without anyone even noticing until the morning. And the road just keeps going like nothing ever happened. I've been driving trucks for a long time, long enough to know that most of the strange things you see on the road have an explanation. But there are still moments that get under your skin, things that happen so fast you can't quite explain them, and you're left trying to convince yourself it was nothing. This was one of those nights, though looking back now, it feels too real to be nothing. It happened a few years ago on a long haul from Missouri to Nevada. I was hauling construction equipment, driving mostly through the night to make up for time I'd lost earlier in the week when my rig had a brake issue. I remember leaving Kansas City late in the afternoon and knowing I'd be on the road all night. The weather was decent at first, mild wind and clear skies, but by the time I hit western Kansas, things had changed. The wind picked up first. It came in bursts that shook the trailer enough to make me grip the wheel harder. Dust started blowing across the road, turning the air into a dull brown haze that made it hard to see the edge lines. I slowed down a little and kept my eyes ahead, trying to stay calm. I'd driven through storms worse than that, but something about the emptiness out there always made me uneasy. It's just miles and miles of open land. No houses, no rest stops, just an occasional gas station or truck stop that always looks half abandoned. By midnight, the wind was howling steady. My CB radio had gone mostly quiet, and I hadn't seen another truck in nearly an hour. I kept watching the odometer tick by, fighting to stay alert. That's when I started noticing what I thought were headlights behind me. Small ones, maybe from a car following at a distance. They'd flicker in the mirrors every few minutes, then disappear. At first, I thought maybe it was another vehicle catching up slowly, but they never seemed to get closer. Just flashes of light, like someone turning their brights on for a second and then cutting them off. I tried not to think much of it. Could have been reflections, or maybe my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But after another half hour, I realized the lights were keeping pace. Not steady, but enough that every few miles they'd show up again, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. I didn't like it, but I had nowhere to stop safely. The next town was still about 40 miles out, and there wasn't much shoulder space on that stretch. Then, right around 2 a.m., it got worse. The wind shifted hard from the side, and for a few seconds, I thought I'd lose control. Dirt and bits of debris whipped across the road, and all I could see in front of me was this moving wall of brown and gray. I slowed down to about 45, gripping the wheel, trying to stay in my lane. That's when I saw it. What I thought was a massive dust cloud ahead, maybe 20 feet tall, rolling toward me across the road. It didn't look natural. It wasn't spinning like a small tornado or swirling like a typical gust. It just moved in a solid wall, straight toward me, thick and heavy like smoke mixed with dirt. My headlights caught it for just a moment, and all I saw was the strange, solid texture to it, almost like it had weight. I had no time to react. I drove right through it. When it hit, everything went pitch dark. I couldn't see a thing out the windshield, not even the glow from my dash lights for a second. The air inside the cab filled with this faint smell, not just dust, more like burnt rubber mixed with something chemical. I instinctively lifted my foot off the gas but didn't brake. I kept both hands tight on the wheel, hoping I'd come out the other side quickly. But then, the strangest thing happened. The truck started to feel heavier, like something was pressing down on the trailer or the back end. The RPMs dropped slightly even though I hadn't changed gears. I remember checking my gauges. Everything read normal. No drop in oil pressure or temperature. The wind outside was still howling, but it felt muffled now, like I was driving underwater. Then it cleared. One moment, I couldn't see anything. The next, I burst out of the other side of that strange cloud and back into open air. The road was empty again. No dust, no lights, nothing but darkness stretching out ahead. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, telling myself it was just a freak dust gust. But when I checked my mirrors again, I noticed something off. The headlights that had been behind me all night were gone, completely gone. At first, that almost made me feel relieved. Maybe whoever it was had turned off somewhere. But a few minutes later, I started hearing this faint metallic sound, a dull clanging that seemed to come from the back of the trailer. It wasn't the usual rattle of chains or loose gear. It was slower, rhythmic, like something bumping against metal in a steady beat. I pulled into a wide dirt turnout maybe 10 miles down the road, one of those emergency pull-off spots for truckers. I left the engine idling and grabbed my flashlight. The wind was still strong, but the air felt cooler now. I walked around the trailer, checking the straps, the load, the tires. Everything looked secure. Nothing was hanging loose or out of place. But when I got to the back end of the trailer, I saw something that froze me. There were streaks of mud, thick, dark smears, along the lower edge of the trailer door. They weren't there before. I always did a walk around before leaving a stop, and that trailer had been spotless. The streaks looked fresh, almost wet, like something had brushed against it. And right below, on the gravel, I noticed faint impressions. Not full footprints, just broken marks that looked like someone had moved around the back end recently. I shined my light around the ground, half expecting to see an animal or maybe another person, but there was nothing. The marks ended just a few feet away and then vanished into the hard-packed dirt. I stood there for a while, listening. The wind carried the usual sounds, a few distant rattles from the trailer, the low hum of the engine. Nothing else. I climbed back in the cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes before getting back on the road. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been near the truck. I drove slower after that, keeping one eye on the mirrors, but the rest of the trip to the next town was uneventful. When I pulled into a truck stop near Limon, I parked under the lights and decided to do another full inspection just to be sure. That's when I noticed the back latch on the trailer door had a thin layer of fresh dust over it, except for one spot. A clear handprint, small and smeared, like someone had grabbed it recently. It wasn't oily or bloody, just clean against the dirt, too small to be mine. I don't know why, but that handprint bothered me more than anything else that night. It looked recent, maybe from when I'd stopped in that turnout. I stood there for a while staring at it, the sound of the highway in the distance, trucks coming and going, everything normal again. But I knew something about that stretch of road wasn't right. The next morning, when the sun came up, I checked again. The handprint was gone. The wind had blown fresh dust over everything. The marks behind the trailer had faded too. Nothing left but the memory of that heavy, solid cloud and the strange weight on my truck as I passed through it. I made my delivery on time, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night for weeks. Every time I drove through that area again, I'd feel uneasy. Sometimes I'd glance at the mirrors and swear I saw faint lights behind me, blinking in and out like before. I never pulled over again on that stretch unless I absolutely had to. It's been years since that haul, but even now, when I think about it, I can still picture the way that dark wall of dirt moved. Too solid, too precise. Maybe it was just a freak storm or a rare wind event, but the feeling of weight on my trailer and that handprint that appeared out of nowhere still don't make sense. I've told myself every logical thing I can think of. Maybe it was someone hitching a ride, maybe a person hiding in the dark out there, maybe something that fell off a passing truck and kicked up that dirt. But none of those explanations fit perfectly. All I know is that stretch of I-70 through western Kansas never felt the same after that night. Every time I drive through it now, I keep my speed steady, eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel, and I don't stop for anything. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years now, and I've seen plenty of strange things on the road. Accidents, odd people, wild animals, bad weather, you name it. But there's one night that still sticks with me more than any other. It didn't involve anything supernatural or out of this world, but it scared me worse than anything ever has. It happened in the middle of summer a few years back. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer from Illinois to Oregon. It was a long, straight run, mostly interstate, and I liked it that way. Less traffic at night, fewer surprises. I had been on the road for about 8 hours when I pulled into a small truck stop somewhere in Nebraska to refuel and stretch my legs. It was around midnight, humid and quiet, with a thick haze hanging over the fields. I remember the air smelled like cut grass and diesel. I topped off the tank, grabbed a cup of coffee, and got back on the road without wasting much time. After about an hour, the highway started to thin out. Fewer lights, fewer signs, just black road and a faint glow from the stars. I had the radio turned low, mostly static with the occasional talk show drifting in. I felt that familiar calm that comes late in a drive. The rhythm of the tires, the hum of the engine, the white lines passing by in steady motion. It almost puts you in a trance. Then I saw something ahead on the shoulder. At first, it looked like a dark shape, maybe an animal or some debris. As I got closer, I realized it was a car. An older sedan, sitting half off the road with the driver's side door open. There were no lights on, no hazards flashing. Just sitting there, dead quiet. I slowed down a little as I passed, out of habit. I didn't see anyone standing around it. The door being open bothered me, though. Out here in the middle of nowhere, that's not normal. But I wasn't about to stop for it either. I've learned you don't pull over for random stuff like that at night unless you absolutely have to. For the next few miles, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind started coming up with explanations. Maybe someone had broken down and walked to get help, or maybe they'd gotten picked up by another car. But the open door stayed in my head. Something about how it was just hanging there, swinging slightly as my lights hit it. About 10 minutes later, I caught something in my mirrors that made my stomach tighten. Headlights, 2 of them far back but moving fast. The weird part was that I hadn't seen a car for nearly an hour, and now this one seemed to come out of nowhere. It was closing the distance quickly, and I kept watching it through the side mirror as it got closer and closer. When it finally reached me, it didn't pass right away. It pulled up behind my trailer and stayed there, just a few car lengths back, keeping pace. No attempt to overtake, just sitting there, following me. I kept my speed steady around 65, trying not to think too much of it. Maybe it was just another driver being cautious or nervous about passing a big rig in the dark. But after 5 minutes, then 10, it was still there. The longer it stayed, the more uneasy I felt. I flicked my high beams off and on, trying to signal them to go around. No reaction. They just stayed right behind me, perfectly centered in the lane. The next exit was still about 15 miles away. There wasn't much I could do but keep driving. I didn't want to slow down too much. It might encourage whoever it was to pull alongside, and I wasn't in the mood for that. Eventually, the road curved, and for a second I lost sight of the headlights. When I came out of the bend, they were gone. Just like that, I glanced at my mirrors, checked again. Nothing. It was empty behind me. The whole highway looked deserted. I felt a rush of relief but also confusion. There was nowhere they could have turned off. No side road, no driveway, just open fields for miles. I figured maybe they'd pulled over or slowed down to mess with me. About 20 minutes later, I noticed something else. A faint sound coming from behind me. It was hard to hear over the engine, but it was there, a dull thumping, like something shifting around inside the trailer. I figured it was just cargo settling, but the rhythm of it was off. It would knock a few times, stop, then start again. I tried not to think much of it, but it got louder the longer I drove. Eventually, I turned off the radio and listened closely. It wasn't random. It sounded like deliberate thuds against the inside wall of the trailer. I checked my gauges, everything was normal. The temperature in the reefer unit was steady. No alarms, no signs of damage. I decided to pull over at the next rest area, which finally came up about 10 miles later. It was one of those small ones with a few parking spots and a single light pole flickering over cracked pavement. I eased the truck into a spot, put it in park, and sat there for a minute. The noise had stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, the warm air hitting me as soon as I opened the door. The only sounds were the hum of the reefer unit and insects buzzing near the light. I walked to the back of the trailer and stood there for a second, listening. Nothing, just the faint vibration of the engine. I unlocked the latch and cracked the doors open, shining my light inside. Everything looked normal. The pallets were still strapped, no signs of damage or movement. The floor was clean. I climbed halfway in, scanning each corner with the flashlight beam, but there was nothing unusual. I figured it must have been something settling after all, maybe the suspension reacting to the wind. I closed it back up and was about to climb into the cab when I noticed tire tracks near the back of the trailer. They were fresh, cutting across the dirt beside the pavement, and they didn't match my truck's pattern. Smaller, from a car, leading in from the highway and stopping right behind my trailer before turning around. That didn't make sense. I hadn't seen any cars since pulling in, and the place had been empty when I arrived. I walked along the tracks with my light. They led back toward the entrance and disappeared onto the road. I stood there for a while, trying to figure it out. Maybe someone had pulled in after me, looked around, and left. But I never heard another engine. I didn't like it. I got back in the cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes before deciding to get back on the road. I was tired, but I didn't want to sleep there. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. For the rest of that night, I didn't see another car. The road felt emptier than ever. My eyes kept flicking to the mirrors out of habit, expecting to see headlights again, but there was nothing. Just black road and the glow of my taillights stretching behind me. When the sun finally came up, I stopped at a way station and did another inspection. This time, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. On the back door of the trailer, just under the latch, was a smear of what looked like dirt. But when I wiped at it with a rag, it came off dark red, like dried blood. Not much, just a faint streak, but enough to make my stomach twist. I stood there staring at it for a long time. There was no sign of damage or animal impact. No feathers, no fur, nothing. Just that faint red smear and those fresh tire tracks from the night before stuck in my mind. I never reported it because I didn't have anything solid to say. I didn't see anyone, didn't hit anything, and nothing was missing or broken. But something about that night didn't sit right. The way that car followed me for miles, the noise in the trailer, the tracks, and that mark on the door. It all added up to something I couldn't explain. I finished that trip and made my delivery on time, but ever since then, I've changed how I drive at night. I don't stop at small rest areas anymore. I stick to big, well-lit truck stops. I always check my trailer more than once before getting back on the road. It's been years since that happened, but every now and then, when I'm out on a long, dark stretch of highway and I catch headlights in my mirror that don't pass right away, I feel that same cold feeling crawl up my neck. Because even if there's a simple explanation for that night, I still don't know who was following me. or why those tire tracks stopped right behind my trailer before disappearing into the dark. And I probably never will. It's strange how the quietest nights on the road are sometimes the ones that end up staying with you forever. I've been driving trucks most of my adult life, hauling everything from produce to heavy machinery across just about every state west of the Mississippi. You learn to get used to the isolation, the hours of empty road, the dim glow of your dashboard lights, and the sound of your own breathing as the miles crawl by. But there are some nights that shake that sense of calm right out of you. Nights when something happens that reminds you how thin the line is between safety and danger out there. This happened about 6 years ago, somewhere in eastern Wyoming. I was running a late-night delivery hauling freight bound for Salt Lake City. I'd already been on the road for over 10 hours, but I wasn't tired yet. I remember the night being clear but cold, the kind of chill that comes out of nowhere once the sun's been down for a few hours. The highway was nearly empty. The only light came from my high beams cutting through the darkness ahead and the occasional reflective road sign flashing by. Wyoming highways at night have this strange, endless feeling to them. Just a 2-lane stretch of asphalt cutting through open land, surrounded by low hills and fields that seem to go on forever. There aren't many exits, not much traffic, just long, quiet miles. I had the radio on low, mostly static and faint music from some station far out of range. I remember checking the clock on the dash, a little after 1 a.m., when I saw something strange up ahead. At first, it looked like a faint light moving along the shoulder. Not headlights, not bright enough for that, more like a flickering white glow that moved side to side. I figured it might be a reflective vest, maybe someone walking their dog or fixing a flat. But as I got closer, I realized there was no car parked nearby, no hazard lights flashing, just that moving light, maybe 200 yards ahead, drifting slowly along the road's edge. I eased off the accelerator and watched it carefully. My first thought was that it might be a person walking, maybe stranded or injured. Out here, that wasn't common, but it happened. I couldn't just assume it was nothing. I slowed to about 40 miles per hour as I approached, leaning forward over the wheel to get a better look. When my headlights finally reached it, I saw what it was. A small flashlight still turned on, lying on the ground near the white line on the shoulder. The beam was angled slightly upward, and that's what made it look like it was moving as the wind shifted it around. There was no one nearby. I pulled into the shoulder a few dozen yards past it, hit my hazard lights, and stepped out. The air hit me cold and sharp, the sound of the wind pushing against the trailer filling the silence. The flashlight was still shining when I walked back toward it. I picked it up and looked around, shining the beam across the ditch beside the road and into the open field beyond. Nothing, just weeds and scrub stretching into the dark. The weird part was how new the flashlight looked. No scratches, no dirt, and the light was bright like the batteries had just been put in. I figured maybe someone had dropped it after fixing a flat or changing a tire, so I looked around for any sign of a vehicle. There were faint tire marks on the shoulder, not from my rig, but they didn't lead to a parked car anywhere close by. It looked like a smaller vehicle had stopped there recently, maybe a few hours ago. I started walking back toward my truck, thinking maybe I should just keep the light and mention it at the next rest stop. But when I climbed back into the cab, I noticed something else. On the opposite side of the road, about 50 yards back from where I'd stopped, there were fresh skid marks, long black streaks cutting into the asphalt and veering toward the ditch. That made me pause. I grabbed my flashlight again and crossed the road carefully. The marks led right into the ditch, then disappeared into the tall grass beyond. I walked along the edge until the beam caught something, a glint of metal down the slope. I climbed down slowly, watching my step, and that's when I saw it. It was a small car, maybe a compact sedan, lying nose down in the ditch. The rear end was twisted, one of the back tires flat. The windshield had shattered, and the front bumper was crumpled inward like it had hit something hard. The doors were shut, but the interior light was off. I felt that cold, uneasy feeling crawl through my stomach. The car had definitely crashed recently. There wasn't any rust on the exposed metal, and the ground around it was still damp where the fluids had leaked out. I circled around to the driver's side and looked inside through the glass. The airbag had deployed, The steering wheel was bent slightly, and the seat was empty. No one in the car, no blood that I could see, no signs of anyone nearby. The driver's door was unlocked. I pulled it open just enough to lean in and check the back seat. Nothing but an empty water bottle and a backpack. I unzipped the bag with my gloved hand and saw clothes, a phone charger, and a wallet. The ID inside showed a woman in her late 20s from Colorado. I stepped back, scanning the area again with my flashlight. The grass behind the car was bent in a trail leading toward the open field, like someone had stumbled away from the wreck. My first thought was that maybe the driver had been disoriented after the crash and wandered off looking for help. But it had been hours since sunset. They wouldn't have gone far in this cold without lights. I followed the flattened path about 30 yards until it ended near a small patch of dirt. That's where I saw the footprints. Bare feet, small ones, leading further into the dark. I shined the light ahead, but the trail vanished a few feet later. No other sign of movement, no sounds, nothing. It didn't make sense. If the driver had shoes in the car, why walk barefoot into an empty field at night? I went back to my truck, sat in the cab for a minute, and thought about what to do. There was no cell service in that area, and the nearest gas station or rest stop was about 20 miles up the highway. I didn't like the idea of leaving someone possibly injured out there, but I couldn't call anyone from where I was sitting. I decided to mark the location and report it once I reached the next stop. I left the flashlight where I'd found it, on the shoulder with the beam pointing upward again, in case anyone else came by before me. Then I climbed back into the cab, put the truck in gear, and got back on the road. About 15 minutes later, I reached a truck plaza and flagged down a state trooper who was fueling up there. I told him about the wreck, gave him the mile marker, and described everything I'd seen. He took down my information and said they'd send someone out immediately. I stayed there for about half an hour, grabbed a cup of coffee, and then continued on my route. 2 days later, after I'd finished my delivery in Utah, I got a call from the highway patrol. They told me they'd located the vehicle I'd reported. It had been there exactly as I described, but no one was found nearby. The only thing they discovered was a set of footprints leading about 100 yards into the field before disappearing. Search teams went out the next morning with dogs, but they didn't find anything. No tracks, no belongings, nothing. The trooper said the woman whose ID I'd found had been reported missing 2 days earlier, last seen leaving a rest stop west of Cheyenne. They figured she might have fallen asleep behind the wheel and crashed. What happened after that, no one knew. I still think about that night sometimes, about how that flashlight was just lying there on the side of the road, still shining, waiting for someone to find it. I try not to think too hard about what might have happened after I left, or how far she might have gone before the cold got to her. Every time I pass through that stretch of highway now, I find myself scanning the shoulders out of habit, looking for anything out of place. I never saw another car in that ditch again, but I've seen plenty of other things. Bits of metal, shredded tires, stray shoes, all reminders that things can go wrong in an instant out there. That flashlight ended up staying with me. The trooper told me to keep it after they were done investigating. It sits in my glove compartment to this day, still works fine. I've used it a dozen times since, but every time I switch it on, I can't help but remember the way its beam looked that night. Faint, flickering on the edge of the highway, the only sign that someone had been there before me and then vanished into the dark. It was a small thing, really, just a forgotten light on an empty road. But that's what makes it stick with me, because out there, in the middle of nowhere, something as small as a flashlight shining alone in the dark can mean the difference between life and death. And sometimes you find it too late to know which it was. I've been driving trucks for a long time. Most of my life has been spent watching the yellow lines slide under my headlights, listening to the hum of the tires, and counting down the hours until my next stop. When you're out there long enough, especially at night, things start to feel different. The world outside your cab becomes a blur of empty roads, open land, and the kind of silence that can make your own thoughts sound louder than they should. I've seen a lot of strange things during my runs. Wrecks, animals, people walking where they shouldn't be. But there's one night that sticks with me the most. It was about 4 years ago, sometime in mid-December. I was hauling steel out of Kansas City, headed west toward Reno. It was late, maybe a little after midnight. The weather had turned bad fast. Not quite a blizzard, but close. The wind was sharp, and snow was blowing across the highway in those thin, shifting streaks that make it hard to tell where the road actually is. I wasn't supposed to be out that late, but I'd lost time earlier that day waiting for a load, so I decided to push through a few more hours. The road I was on was a long, quiet stretch of US 50, somewhere in western Kansas or eastern Colorado. Flat, empty, and lifeless. No towns for miles. Just fence posts and snow-covered fields fading into darkness. The kind of place where you don't see another vehicle for hours. My headlights were the only light for as far as I could see, bouncing off the snow and giving everything that dull, gray glow. I remember my wipers squeaking against the windshield, the defroster struggling to keep up, and the rumble of the engine filling the cab. It was the sort of drive where your body's tired, but your mind keeps you wired. I was focused, watching for patches of ice and keeping my speed steady at around 50. About an hour into that stretch, I started to notice something strange. Up ahead, maybe a quarter mile away, I saw faint red lights flickering, like hazard lights, but uneven, almost as if they were flashing weakly. I figured someone had gone off the road. Out there, it happened a lot in bad weather. As I got closer, I slowed down. The snow on the road had thickened, and the lights were clearer now. A pair of taillights, half buried in a snowbank just off the shoulder. It looked like a small SUV, tilted at an angle with one side stuck deep in the drift. There was no movement, no other cars around, and no footprints that I could see through the blowing snow. I pulled over carefully, set my brakes, and put on my hazard lights. I always carried a heavy-duty flashlight in the cab, so I grabbed it, threw on my gloves, and stepped out. The wind hit me like a wall, freezing cold, strong enough to sting my face. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the vehicle. It was definitely an SUV, probably gray or black, though it was hard to tell under all the snow. The rear end was still visible, but the front had plowed deep into the ditch. Both rear doors were closed, but the driver's door was wide open, the interior light dim but still on. I called out once instinctively, then stopped. My voice just vanished into the wind. There was no answer anyway. I walked up closer, shining my flashlight inside. The first thing I noticed was that the seatbelt was unbuckled and hanging to the side. The driver's seat was empty. The dashboard lights were still faintly glowing. The battery hadn't completely died yet, and the key was still in the ignition. A phone charger hung from the console, but there was no phone. The snow inside the open door looked like it had been stepped on, like someone had climbed out and walked away. I swung the light around the ground and saw faint boot prints leading away from the car toward the field on the other side of the ditch. They were already filling with snow, barely visible now. I stood there for a second, thinking. It didn't make much sense. Whoever was driving had gotten stuck, but instead of staying in the car, where it was warmer and safer, they'd gotten out and walked straight into the cold. No visible road, no light, just open country. I followed the tracks for maybe 10 yards before they started fading completely. The snow was too thick, and the wind was covering them faster than I could follow. The beam of my flashlight disappeared into the blowing flakes. It was just white in every direction. At that point, I decided to head back to my truck. It was too dangerous to wander too far, and there was no cell service out there to call for help. I figured I'd radio it in once I got closer to town. But as I climbed back into my cab, I noticed something else. A small piece of fabric caught on the edge of my front bumper. Looked like part of a glove, maybe torn off by the wind or someone brushing against the truck. That stopped me cold. I looked around again, shining the light under the trailer, along the shoulder, into the ditch. Nothing, just the wind and the snow. It gave me a bad feeling, that sense that something wasn't right, that maybe I hadn't seen the whole picture. I sat in the cab for a minute, trying to warm up my hands. The heater hummed, the windshield fogged up slightly, and I stared at the snow drifting across the road in front of me. My headlights lit up the SUV still sitting there, half covered now. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the driver had tried to wave someone down before I arrived. Maybe they'd already been out there for hours. I thought about that open door, the footprints disappearing into the dark, the running lights still faintly flickering. All signs of someone who had been there not long ago. I decided to wait a little while longer, just in case someone came back. I shut off my engine, left the hazards on, and sat in silence, listening to the wind. The minutes dragged by. The snow got heavier. After about 15 minutes, I started to notice something odd. Faint shapes moving in the distance. It looked like wind-blown snow at first, but then I realized it was a set of headlights. A small car or SUV, approaching from the opposite direction. When it got closer, it slowed down near the wreck, pulled over for a few seconds, then backed up and drove away again. I didn't see anyone get out. Maybe they didn't want to get stuck too. Couldn't blame them. I waited another 10 minutes before finally pulling back onto the road. I made it to a rest area about 30 miles west and told a highway patrol officer I saw there what I'd found. The SUV, the open door, the tracks. He wrote down everything and said he'd send someone to check it out immediately. I didn't think much more about it until the next night when I was stopped at a diner just outside of Grand Junction. I saw a small report on the local news playing on the TV above the counter. A vehicle had been found buried in snow along US 50. Same make and color I'd seen. The driver, a man in his 30s, had apparently tried to walk for help and didn't make it far. Searchers found him less than half a mile from the road the next morning, curled up in a field. That hit me hard. I'd been right there, maybe only an hour or two before he froze. I'd seen his footprints but turned back too soon. The realization sank in while I sat there with my coffee going cold in my hands. The image of that open car door wouldn't leave my mind. For a long time after that, I kept thinking about how small the choices are that separate living from dying on the road. If I had arrived 20 minutes earlier, maybe I would have seen him moving through the snow. Maybe I could have given him shelter in the cab, called for help when I reached service. But instead, I'd driven away, thinking it was safer not to get caught in the storm. Ever since that night, I've stopped more often when I see cars stranded on the shoulder, even if they look empty. I carry extra blankets and water in the cab now, just in case. The roads can turn against you fast out there, and sometimes people vanish quietly into the night before anyone realizes they were even there. That stretch of US 50 still feels different to me whenever I pass it. I know it's just another piece of road, just another memory buried under snow and time, but I can't help glancing at the shoulders, scanning for anything out of place. An open door, a dim light, a set of tracks fading into the dark, because I know what can happen when you don't look closely enough. And that's something that never really leaves you once you've seen it. I've been a truck driver for almost 20 years now. You see a lot out there when you're driving long stretches of highway night after night. Most people never realize how empty the country really is once you get away from the cities. Just miles and miles of dark road, flat land, and silence. Sometimes it's peaceful. Other times, it feels like the world has forgotten about you. But there was one night that really stuck with me, something that still makes me uneasy when I think about it. It happened about 7 years ago, somewhere in southern Utah. I had a long haul from Phoenix to Salt Lake City, and I was running late after losing a few hours at a way station. It was early spring, but the air still had that dry chill to it once the sun went down. I remember checking my clock. It was just after 2 in the morning. The road was quiet, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for what felt like an hour. That stretch of highway ran through desert land, flat and endless. No streetlights, no gas stations, just black sky and open sand on either side. The moon was hidden behind a layer of clouds, so the only light I had came from my headlights and the soft glow of my dashboard. The hum of the tires was the only sound inside the cab. I'd been driving steady, sipping coffee, trying to keep myself alert. Fatigue has a way of creeping up on you slowly. Your eyes get heavy, your mind drifts, and then small things start to feel off. I kept catching myself glancing at the mirrors more than usual. I wasn't sure why. The road was completely empty, but I had that weird feeling, like someone was following me even though I knew that wasn't possible. About 20 minutes later, I came around a slow bend and saw something ahead. At first, it looked like just another piece of tire tread, one of those big strips that come off semi-tires. But as my lights hit it, I realized it wasn't in the road. It was beside it. It looked like a car door standing upright on the shoulder. I slowed down a little. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a door at all. It was a whole car, a dark sedan, half pulled off the road, the front end buried in the dirt. The hazard lights were flashing weakly. The battery must have been dying. I didn't see any damage, so it didn't look like a wreck. More like someone had stopped suddenly and left it there. I eased over to the shoulder and parked behind it. Out there, it's normal for truckers to stop if something looks off. People break down and freeze, or worse, get hit because no one stops to help. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped down from the cab, and started walking toward the car. The air was cold, and the wind had picked up, carried sand that bit against my face. The desert was so quiet that the sound of my boots on the gravel felt loud. As I got closer, I noticed the driver's door was open. The interior light was on, and the hazard lights blinked steadily, washing the inside of the car in that dull orange glow. When I shined my light inside, I saw that the keys were still in the ignition. The engine was off, though. A half-empty bottle of water sat in the cup holder. There was a jacket tossed on the passenger seat and a phone charger plugged into the dash. But no phone. I stepped back and looked around. There were footprints leading away from the car, one set going off into the desert. The prints looked recent. The wind hadn't covered them yet, and I could still see the shape of the soles. Whoever it was had walked straight into open land. No light, no trail, no sense of direction. That didn't make sense to me. Out here, at night, walking into the desert could kill you before morning. You could get lost within minutes. I stood there for a while, scanning the horizon with my flashlight. The beam stretched maybe 50 yards before fading into black. Nothing moved out there, just sand, rocks, and a few scattered bushes. I thought maybe they had gone to get help, but there was nothing within 10 miles either way. I'd driven that stretch enough to know that. Still, I didn't want to wander off and get turned around myself, so I went back to my truck. I figured I'd make a note of the mile marker and call it in once I got to an area with cell signal. I climbed into the cab, wrote down the location, and sat there for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel. My headlights lit up the car, the hazard lights flashing like a slow heartbeat in the dark. I remember thinking how strange it looked, so still, so out of place. After a few minutes, I put the truck in gear and started pulling away. That's when I noticed something in my side mirror. A faint light flickered behind me, near the car. I stopped, looked again. It looked like the beam of a small flashlight, but it was unsteady, moving slowly in a zigzag pattern. At first, I thought the driver had come back. But the light wasn't near the road, it was coming from the desert side, the same direction the footprints had gone. It was moving oddly, like it was too low to the ground, or like whoever held it was stumbling. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds before it went out completely. I waited a bit longer, but the light didn't come back. I wanted to help, but I couldn't see a thing beyond my headlights. I didn't even know if I was seeing right. The wind and darkness can play tricks on your eyes out there. Eventually, I decided the best thing to do was to keep driving and report it as soon as I hit signal. I reached a rest stop about 30 miles up the road. There were a few other truckers there, and I used the payphone to call highway patrol. I told them what I'd seen, the car, the footprints, the light, and gave them the mile marker. The officer said they'd send someone to check it out immediately. The next day, around noon, I was still thinking about it. I turned on the radio during lunch, and sure enough, there was a short news update about a missing driver found in the desert off US 89. The car matched what I'd seen. According to the report, the man had been driving from Flagstaff to Provo when he apparently pulled over and wandered off. They found him about a mile from the highway, dehydrated and disoriented, but alive. He'd been trying to find help after his car broke down, but he went in the wrong direction and got lost. They said if he'd been out there another few hours, the cold would have killed him. When I heard that, it hit me hard. I realized that light I'd seen was probably a dying flashlight, or maybe his phone. I was right there. I could have gone after him, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't safe, that I'd done the right thing by reporting it instead of going blind into the dark. But even now, years later, I still replay that moment in my mind, sitting in my cab, watching that faint light fade away. Since then, I've stopped for just about anything I see on the road. A stalled car, a hazard light, even a shape that looks off in the dark. It's not about guilt exactly, more like a reminder. Out there on those long, empty stretches, people vanish easier than you'd think. All it takes is one bad decision, one wrong turn, 1 hour too long in the cold. I still drive that route sometimes. Every time I pass that section, I can't help but slow down and look toward the open desert. It's just a blur of sand and brush now, nothing unusual about it. But every time, I remember the glow of those hazard lights flickering weakly in the wind and that single beam of light swaying in the dark before it went out for good. It taught me something about the road, that the scariest things you find out there aren't ghosts or monsters. It's the silence, the loneliness, and how easy it is to disappear without anyone noticing until it's too late.